They sealed the wing 11 minutes after the rupture, and I was still inside it. I want to say that surprised me. It didn't. 14 months on the Sundral Reach with the diplomatic medical corps had taught me the shape of their fear faster than I'd learned their language. When something broke that the court couldn't explain, they didn't look for the break. They looked for a hand to put it in. Mine was the only human hand in the room. The reactor line had been groaning for 3 days. I'd said so twice. In maintenance logs nobody read past the cover page. When it went the way old things go, not loud, just final, a tired exhale of pressure through a seam patched once too often. The east wing folded in on itself like a held breath let go. Stone dust. Dark. The Queen's chair on its side 11 feet from where I'd been standing, and the Queen herself half under a fallen support beam, not moving. Advisor Cale Voranth found his footing before anyone else did. He found his footing and his story in about the same 4 seconds. The human tampered with the coolant feed. The human has been seen near the lower conduits. Seal the wing. Do not send rescue until we understand what he has done. Nobody asked what evidence he had. Fear doesn't ask. It just needs somewhere to stand. I heard the outer seal grind shut through 8 feet of rubble, while I was still digging toward her with my hands. And I understood, in the plain, unhurried way you understand the worst facts, that I was now trapped with a woman half her own court believed I had tried to kill, and that the people on the other side of that door had just decided I would have to prove otherwise from inside a tomb. I found her by the sound of her breathing. Shallow. Wrong rhythm. I got the beam off her with a length of conduit pipe as a lever in my back screaming, and when the dust light from my wrist lamp found her face, I saw Queen Ilsevit Marrowcane the way I don't think anyone on the Reach had seen her in years, not composed, not crowned. Just a woman bleeding from a head wound, her violet-gray eyes trying to focus through the dust. "Ash," she said, just that, like she was confirming a fact and didn't yet have room to ask what it meant that I was the one who'd come. "Don't talk, let me look at you." She had a fractured collarbone, a scalp laceration that bled worse than it was, and the part that mattered, a slow internal bleed I could hear in the wrongness of her breath before I could see it. I had a field kit, half a canteen, and about 6 hours of air in a pocket the rupture had left us, sealed tight enough to keep atmosphere from bleeding into vacuum, not sealed well enough to last. I worked. I didn't explain myself to her, because there was nothing to explain that the work itself wasn't already saying. Somewhere around the 2nd hour, with her collarbone set and splinted against a strip of my own jacket, she said, "They will have told the relay teams you did this." "Probably." "And you are still," she stopped, looked at my hands steady on the pressure bandage at her side. "You're still working like a man who didn't." "I am a man who didn't." "I know that," she said, quiet, like it cost her something to say plainly what the rest of her court hadn't bothered to ask. "I knew it before Voranth opened his mouth. I have read your maintenance logs, Ash. I read all of them. You flagged that line 3 times. I hadn't known she read them. It didn't change anything I was doing with my hands, but something in my chest unclenched half a turn, the way it does when a fact you'd quietly decided not to need turns out to be true anyway. The air thinned through the 3rd hour. I gave her more of it than I took, angling the shared line her direction, taking my own breaths shallow and counted. She noticed. She'd survived 4 decades of court before I ever set foot on her world, and survival teaches you to watch what people do with the things they think you can't see. "You're rationing it toward me. You're the one bleeding internally on a 6-hour clock. You could be bleeding the same and not telling me." "I'm not." "You wouldn't tell me if you were." She wasn't wrong, and we both knew it, and neither of us said anything else about it. I kept working. She let me. By the 4th hour her fever was climbing and her words had started to slip their moorings, drifting between her own tongue and mine, between now and some earlier year. She talked about her sister, dead at the founding war. She talked about a coronation gown that hadn't fit right and nobody had told her. Once, eyes shut, voice gone soft and strange, she said. Don't let them open the seal until you're certain I'm not what they say you made me. You were never anything I made you, I said. You're the same woman who read maintenance logs nobody else on this court has ever opened in their lives. She didn't answer that one. I don't think she had the strength left to. But her hand found my wrist in the dark and held on, not desperate, just certain, the grip of someone confirming a thing was actually there. I kept the line open. I kept the bandage tight. I kept talking to her in the low, flat, unhurried voice I'd used on every wounded soldier and frightened civilian in 14 years of this work, because panic kills slower patients than wounds do, and because some stubborn part of me had decided long ago, on a battlefield that wasn't this one, that I did not leave people. I'd told a dying friend that once, and meant it as a fact about myself rather than a promise to him, and it had simply never stopped being true. I am not a hero in this. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I wasn't thinking about her crown or her court or what it would mean, later, that I had done this. I was thinking about pressure and air and the next 40 minutes, the way you think about a task small enough to actually survive. Somewhere past the 5th hour, I heard the first cutting torch bite into the outer seal. Not Voranth's order. I learned later it was her own household guard, a captain named Resh Dalen, who'd finally stopped asking permission and started cutting, because the alternative was watching his queen die behind a door her own advisor was too frightened to open. It took another 90 minutes to get through 11 feet of collapsed stone with hand tools and a borrowed mining rig, working in shifts, while Voranth stood behind them insisting it wasn't safe yet. Ilsevit woke fully, for the last clear stretch before the cutting reached us, somewhere in that final hour. The fever had broken just enough to let her eyes focus. "You stayed," she said, "not a question, an accounting." Where would I go? Anywhere there was a door. There wasn't actually, not one I'd have used. She looked at me a long moment in the cone of failing wrist light, dust still settling behind her in the dark. And something in her face did the thing I'd watched happen slowly all night without nomming it. It stopped bracing, stopped being the face of a queen managing a room. It was just a woman looking at the only person who had not, even once, treated her survival as something owed back to her. "They will say you did this to win my favor," she said. "Voranth will say it before the dust has cleared from his own boots. Let him. That doesn't trouble you." "You read the logs," I said. "You already knew before he opened his mouth. That's the only verdict I was ever working for." She didn't say anything to that. She didn't need to. Her hand was still on my wrist, and she turned it slow, deliberate even through the fever shake, until her palm pressed flat against mine. Not the grip of someone falling, the grip of someone choosing to hold on. We sat like that in the dark, the torchlight starting to flare gold at the seam of the seal, 11 feet of stone between us, and a court that had already tried and convicted me twice before any rescue reached either of us. "Welcome home," she said, so quiet I almost missed it under the grinding of the cutters, and I understood she didn't mean the citadel, and I didn't ask her to explain. The seal broke open into white light and shouting, and Resh Dalen's voice cracking with relief he didn't bother hiding. They came through with stretchers and a medical team twice the size of the one that should have been sent 6 hours earlier, and Voranth's accusation simply had nowhere left to stand. A queen carried out alive, stable, her bleeding controlled by the hands of the man he'd called her murderer, was not an argument anyone in that corridor was interested in finishing. She didn't let go of my hand until they lifted her onto the stretcher. Even then, she held my eyes instead, steady, dry now, the fever shine gone and something else in its place. "You'll attend me," she said, "when I'm well enough to hold court again." It wasn't a question, and it wasn't an order either. It was something closer to a fact she was choosing to make true, the same unhurried certainty I'd heard in her voice in the dark when she said I read all of them. "I'll be there," I said. I was. That's the only part of the story that matters telling twice.